Okay, good evening. Goeienaand tutu imbeweni, everyone. Welcome to this Referendum Party live Q&A. We're going to discuss some interesting issues, obviously very developing issues. Hopefully you can hear me very clearly on this new microphone. And it's very windy, obviously, across the West Coast. You're seeing some terrifying images, videos. My sister just sent me an image of a house, or excuse me, a tree falling on a flat and almost completely destroying the bathroom. There's a video image of a truck being blown across the Van Reinsdorp Pass. So yeah, it's difficult times and it's load shedding here in the Drakensberg area, but we managed to sort it out with a few lights, a few battery packs. So we're still going ahead. Prepare as always. But okay, Referendum Party. Phil, with my usual quirky sense of humor, obviously Phil, the leader of the Referendum Party, is here with me, with my usual quirky sense of humor. Let's imagine that the two of us mates and are tasting, being prepared a muffin competition where we're tasting muffins. And we just got a great taste of some chocolate chip muffins. A person told us this wheat was grown by Jan van Riebeek on the valley, and it's 16-year-old wheat and da da da. And now we're moving ahead to the carrot tasting muffin competition. And to do that, we have to go into the elevator. And in the elevator, I turn to you and ask, but Phil, while we're talking, you mentioned something about creating your own party, being the leader of the Referendum Party. Can you tell us more about that? Or can you tell me more about that?
Thanks, Donald. I guess that's your quirky way of asking for an elevator pitch for the Referendum Party. So look, let me sum it up in three phases, and for people who want to go to our website, we've got a page there. It says intro. You look, there's an orange button. It says Introduction to the Referendum Party, and actually we've got the three basic positions of what the Referendum Party stands for. So maybe that's a good way to explain what do we stand for. Number one, we think Cape independence is by far the best solution for the Western Cape people. Ultimately, if we believe if we can't get our independence, then our future is a pretty torrid affair in South Africa. And why? Because the Western Cape perpetually is governed by a national government which it didn't vote for. That national government has been terrible. It's going to be worse after 2024 and not better. And yeah, ultimately the Western Cape, it doesn't matter who governs it, just doesn't have control of the key issues: economy, how policing, borders, taxation and spending. So therefore, it doesn't really matter who we elect. They don't have any power, and the main decisions are going to be made by the ANC, and likely after this election, the ANC, the EFF and MK. That's a pretty terrifying prospect. So number one, we absolutely believe in Cape independence, which we think is critical for our future. But number two, we've got to deal with our present here and now. The Referendum Party isn't about to become the party of government. In fact, we don't want to be the party of government. What we want is to deliver a referendum on Cape independence. And ultimately, what we're saying is, for now, let's keep we're not looking to take over power, not looking to remove the DA from power. We certainly don't want the ANC to come back to power. So for now, let's keep the DA in power. They've done a much better job than the ANC, and clearly, given the choice between those two parties, we'd much rather support the DA than the ANC. So people who want to support Cape independence, but are worried that if they vote for the Referendum Party, somehow it's going to allow the ANC back into power, can relax. The whole point of the Referendum Party is to give people a safe way to vote for Cape independence. You're not risking removing the DA from power. You're definitely not risking the ANC coming back. So number two, we're going to keep the DA in power for now. But number three, and that's the critical part that goes with it, we're going to force them to call a referendum on Cape independence, because we're living on borrowed time in the Western Cape. Ultimately, the South Africa's hurtling towards failed state status. It's going to be worse after 2024, and the Western Cape can't hold out forever. We've got this massive migration of people who are fleeing a sort of failing South Africa, coming into the Western Cape, and those people are not voting for the DA. Ultimately, increasingly ironically, they're voting for the EFF. And so therefore, we've got to solve this issue whilst we've got time. Otherwise, the Western Cape is going to end up looking like the rest of South Africa very, very quickly. So there's our three issues. Number one, Cape independence gives us the best future. Number two, we're not looking to remove the DA. We're definitely not looking to allow the ANC back into power so you can vote safely for the Referendum Party. But actually, we are going to force the DA to call a referendum on Cape independence, which polling shows that 68% of people in the Western Cape want, and which will allow us then a long-term future.
Great. Phil, while we're waiting for the questions, and I'm sure a lot of going to come in, I just want to ask you, John Steenhuisen recently made a speech where it seems like they're specifically targeting Knysna. Knysna is the big example of the coalition of corruption. And he says, you can't vote for these smaller parties. Look what happened to Knysna. By implication, it seems like he's suggesting if you're going to vote for the Referendum Party, you might get Knysna. So what would you say to that?
Well, the irony, I would turn it completely around on its head and say, if you don't vote for the Referendum Party, you're going to end up with Knysna. What's happened at Knysna was historically, or in the past, was a DA-ren province. We've seen a massive influx of people who ultimately then have arrived from other parts of South Africa, which are in a much worse condition than the Western Cape, and they've illegally occupied a land around Knysna, and ultimately they've then voted in a disastrous government, and Knysna's collapsed. And I would say to John Steenhuisen, no, Knysna exactly the opposite. Knysna is proof of what happens if you don't take steps whilst you still can. And we have to protect the Western Cape, which has its unique character and culture and ideology, which we know from voting, and we have to protect it whilst we still can. Right now, the Western Cape wants to be governed very, very differently from South Africa. And at this point in time, as we know, the DA have had a 15 years outright majority in the Western Cape, but it's falling. It was 59%, it was 55%. We're now seeing in polling it's maybe 51%, and there's a real prospect, and the DA themselves are recognizing that perhaps they'll fall under 50%, and that's just an erosion of support for the DA. And I so sorry, I've sort of wandered off slightly on the topic there, but let me come back to that and say, yes, Knysna is an example of what will happen if you don't take stitches in time and protect the Western Cape, and that is the critical step here.
Absolutely, and perhaps it will be worth to point out that it seems like the DA is suggesting that the Knysna is the only coalition government in the Western Cape. But I mean, there's multiple coalition municipality governments which are in coalition with the Vryheidsfront Plus, and those coalition governments municipalities are working great. So perhaps if you want to bring it down to statistic, that's 1% example of multiple coalition municipalities in the Western Cape that's doing badly, but the others are actually doing great, the coalition municipalities with the Vryheidsfront Plus. So it's not a question of voting for a different party, it's voting for the wrong party, like the Patriotic Alliance.
Yeah, well, it's all about ideology, isn't it? So I think you can have a coalition between partners who are ideologically aligned. And of course, I get it. I understand from a DA's point of view, an outright majority is much better. They can just enact their policy positions. So I understand why they want a majority. And I think for many of us, I mean, look, we're relatively neutral on the sort of the politics beyond Cape independence at the Referendum Party. What we want to do is force the Western Cape government to ask the Western Cape people what they want. And the DA have created this mess for themselves. They promised a referendum on Cape independence, which 68% of Western Cape voters want, and then they broke their word. And it was John Steenhuisen himself who promised that referendum, and he promised it to me. So they're in this situation because they, ultimately because their primary focus has been on national politics, and actually they're trying to avoid what the Western Cape people want for fear of how that's going to impact the DA on a national stage, and that really is untoward. And what you're seeing in the Western Cape is a lot of voters cottoning on to that and starting to say, well, hold on a second. So you're seeing the Freedom Front Plus take gains away from the DA, because you find particularly amongst the white Afrikaans audience recognizing, well, hold on a second, this is not in our best interest. And then you're seeing the DA losing voters on the other flank, amongst coloured voters, and to the Cape Coloured Congress, or now the National Coloured Congress, and to the Patriotic Alliance, where people are just frustrated because the DA has just been too timid. And actually, if they would just act in the best interest of the Western Cape people, then a lot of these issues wouldn't go away. So they kind of want to have their cake and eat it, and the answer is to listen to the people of the Western Cape, give them a referendum, allow them to vote for the best future that they can possibly have, and then most of their problems will go away. The only reason the Referendum Party exists is because the Western Cape Premier refused to call a referendum on Cape independence, even though his party had promised it, and even though 2/3 of people in the Western Cape wanted it. So this is a problem they brought on themselves.
Absolutely. Okay. First question from Panda. It seems like a half-completed question, but I think we can get the gist. Phil, with the EFF coming out saying that they'll work with the ANC if they agree to make Floyd Shivambu finance minister, I assume what he wanted to add is, what is your opinion on that?
No, thank you. And look, so you can go back to what we said at the Cape Independence Advocacy Group after 2021. Two things have always been inevitable. One is that the ANC, when it falls below 50%, becomes more dangerous and not less dangerous, because it ends up being forced into the arms of the more radical partners, of which the EFF was one. The EFF, the ANC and MK are ideologically aligned. They may have issues around certain things, but ultimately they're all African nationalist parties. They really believe in non-racialism. They believe in Africa for Africans, and actually they want to fundamentally. I mean, you saw Jacob Zuma saying, "Hey guys, let's just get 66%, and everything else will take care of itself." And that's the issue on the one side. So that was always going to be the case. And the multi-party charter was always doomed to failure. Anyone, and I'm not saying this with the benefit of hindsight. You can go back. I've said it for 2 years. I've written it in articles. I wrote an article called Moonshot Maths, when Steenhuisen first came out and started to suggest that the Moonshot Pact was viable. It was never viable. And actually, in many ways, a lot of that Moonshot Pact has been very, very cynical by the parties that are in it. None of the leaders of those parties have ever believed they were going to get 50%. And that I'm telling you as a matter of fact. It's not speculation. They know they cannot get 50%. But what they also know is if they can convince you that maybe they might just, then they will convince people to vote for them, and that has been quite a cynical ploy. So, look, in my mind, the most likely outcome after 2024 is an ANC, EFF, MK government in some configuration. That's the most likely outcome. The only other option would be an ANC DA government, but that would have a whole load of other problems and wouldn't last 5 minutes. And what we can be absolutely certain of is two things. It's going to be absolute hell after 2024, whoever gets in. And the Western Cape doesn't need to be in this mess, because there's zero prospect of the Western Cape electing the ANC and the EFF in any combination to allow them anywhere near government. The only reason in the Western Cape, while what we are now debating, might we end up with an ANC EFF government, is because we haven't had a referendum on Cape independence, and we're still at the mercy of voters in the rest of South Africa.
Absolutely. Okay, next question from Rian Brandt. Marketing. Will Facebook and Twitter marketing of Referendum Party be sufficient in the short time left? Notice I'm still using Twitter because I don't think anyone has gotten used to X yet, but yeah.
Thanks, Rian. Look, in an ideal world, we would have had a much longer run at these elections. I would love to have had a year and a half to prepare for these elections. That wasn't our reality. We hoped that the DA would have honoured their word on the referendum. We only finalised. Windy only formally came out and said no in October last year, and now it's a David against Goliath type struggle. We're a tiny party. We've got a hell of a lot of work to get done, I wish we had more time. I wish we had more money, but we don't. And I think we just have to trust. And one of the great things that we've done in the Cape Independence Movement is we've been David and not Goliath for a very, very long time, and we've been written off, as you know, and mocked and joked, and yet here we are, and we just keep on getting stronger and stronger and stronger and growing in prominence. And I believe as we get nearer and nearer to these elections, then obviously we'll start consolidating that vote. So there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of work being done. And I've privately described that as saying, well, look, what are we doing? We're at the top of the hill. We've got a snowball. We want to push over the hill. And at the bottom of that hill is election day. And we need our snowball to be 100,000 votes big at the bottom of the hill. And we've now got 50 days to get it there. I think we can do it. I think it's a huge task, but it can't just be Facebook and Twitter. It's Facebook and Twitter, and it's our activism teams, and it's our media teams, and ultimately it's ordinary people and voters convincing their friends and their family to go and vote for RP. We've got a newsletter going out on Tuesday, and we've said, look, you know what? 20,000 people signed to get RP into this election. If those 20,000 people can all convince 4 of their friends to vote for RP, we've got 100,000 votes, and we can deliver Cape independence. And what a motivation that is. Go convince 4 people. And actually, we can change your world, and we can deliver you a future that will protect our legacy here in this Southern African tip, for generations to come. So yes, it's achievable, but it depends on everybody. And if people think they're going to sit back and allow us to do the work, and they'll just go and vote on election day, then it's all going to go horribly wrong. But actually, if people rally around, as they are, I have to say, and we all work together, then 100,000 is very, very achievable. And interesting enough, I should say at this point, Cape Exit have a key role to play here. We know the organisation Cape Exit, but 840,000 people who've signed up and said they want Cape independence. Well, they have to help us now to get 100,000 of those to actually go and vote for it, because people must realise that if they don't vote for Cape independence, it isn't going to happen. You can't vote against Cape independence and then expect the people who are fighting for it to deliver it. And now that's one of the, outside of Facebook and Twitter, then Cape Exit have a critical role to play in convincing people to vote for Cape independence.
Absolutely. And I'm paraphrasing perhaps here, Phil, but I believe Harvard University did a study where they analyzed, like, over the 100 years, mass movements across the world, non-violent mass protests. I don't know what's the correct term, but I mean non-violent protest movements. And when 3.5% got involved, it has never failed. It has a remarkable success rate. And 3.5% in the Western Cape is 100,000 people. And that's what the Referendum Party is targeting. And
correct. Yeah. So there was a study done. I think it was about 110 years. So they looked at that all movements across the world, and on all of the continents, and said, look, where we've had non-violent protest, what is the magic key? Because people often think, well, you need to get 50% of the people, but you don't. That follows. And what they found was 3.5% was the magic number. Whenever 3.5% of the population got actively involved, not passively involved, actively involved, and went out and fought peacefully and democratically for whatever their cause was. There wasn't a single example anywhere in the world where they ever failed. And actually, peaceful protest was twice as successful as violent protest. And now, by pure chance, we already had a target of 100,000 votes, because our 100,000 votes was a function of how many seats we needed to be able to push the DA into a Cape independence coalition government and get our referendum. But by coincidence, or perhaps not by coincidence, there's 3.2 million voters in the Western Cape, and 3.5% of them is 100,000. So that's our number. It's one of those numbers that keeps coming back. That is the key to delivering Cape independence, getting 100,000 people and there's way more than 100,000 people in the Western Cape who want Cape independence. We've just got to get people to say, look, you know what, you can have it, but you actually have to go out and vote for it, because if you don't vote for it, it isn't going to happen.
Yeah, I love that. That's so inspiring. It just shows that it's absolutely possible. Okay, Grasshopper. Does the Referendum Party have any policies on the woke ideology that's plaguing the entire globe at the moment?
Yeah, look, this is one of those difficult subjects, and well, not actually over woke, because woke's fairly easy. Let's just split this into two things, because one of the things that we often have, which can be a bit frustrating for us sometimes, is often people wanting to sort of tag their ideologies onto Cape Independence. And the whole point of setting up the Referendum Party is it's a broad church. It's a single issue party which says, look, you know what, we may differ ultimately on what we're going to decide on when we end up getting Cape Independence, because that's a choice for the Western Cape people. But we can all agree that we need to have the ability to make decisions, because it doesn't matter whether you vote DA, whether you vote Freedom Front Plus, whether you vote PA, whether you vote NCC. It doesn't matter who the government is. If they haven't got the power to make any decisions, it's pointless. So we're a single issue party, and therefore we stay off of policy platforms. We stay away from things that got nothing to do with Cape Independence. That said, one thing I can say fairly clear is there's nobody in the Referendum Party who is remotely woke, because clearly, that sort of national, that's the prevailing ideology in South Africa, and it's a disaster. And the Western Cape is different to that. So on this particular issue, while we definitely don't have a policy because we're a single issue party, I can tell you there is nobody in the Referendum Party who would be considered woke. We want non-racialism. We absolutely hate this nonsensical world that we're living in, where we for example, BE and affirmative action and things like that, just absolutely disastrous, and we're vehemently opposed to them, but understand that's not going to appear in our manifesto, because our manifesto is going to say we want a referendum on Cape Independence, and that is what we stand for.
There's probably not much of a difference between African nationalism and the woke ideology, quote unquote. So it's pretty much, to a certain degree, probably the same thing. And
I'm going to disagree with you there, Donald. I'm going to say they're very, very different things. But the irony is the African nationalism is just basically, for the most part, racism. It's black racism, which obviously is a more sensitive subject than white and coloured racism. And wokeism is a movement that effectively turns its blind eye to that and almost applauds that, because somehow people believe that people of other races should be beating themselves up for the perceived sins of their fathers and grandfathers and great-great-grandfathers from generations before. And obviously that's the nonsensical part of it. Actually, we're all individuals, we're all here. South Africa belongs equally to everybody that's here, and actually we should be creating a society that gives everybody opportunity to succeed, but ultimately then people must play their part in using that opportunity, because we aren't all equal. Ultimately, we're all individuals, we have our own skills, and we should be able to be rewarded for the fruits of our own efforts.
Okay, next question from Chris Boots. My second question is, how long does the Western Cape have if we fail to get a referendum in 2024? Is 2029 too late? So do we have to get it now? I think that's basically the summary of his question.
Well, I think look, it obviously it's very difficult to predict the future, but I think yes, 2024 is a critical. I think it would be, we don't know what the future is going to hold, and at what point the actual final tipping point comes for South Africa. But I mean, Donald, you and I were both at the Biz News conference, and we were there for John Steenhuisen's speech. John Steenhuisen stood up and said, I don't think there'll be free and fair elections in 2029. And I think that's quite a chilling comment from the leader of the opposition. We're not talking about some conspiracist, I think we've got to be careful. Look, do I think there are other opportunities for Cape Independence down the line? Yes, because one of the opportunities for Cape Independence is when the South African state completely collapses and we end up in chaos. And the KZN riots aren't riots; they're just our normal way of life. Then out of that chaos, there is the possibility of a sort of a Cape Phoenix rising from the ashes. But I mean, do we really want to risk for that when we could just go and vote for it? So So, if we don't get a referendum in 2024, it doesn't mean that everything is lost, but hell, it just gets harder and harder and harder. And I think one of the biggest things I say, people look, don't wait till after 2024. And that's why we put up the Referendum Party. Vote for the Referendum Party. We will still guarantee that you're going to end up with a DA and not an ANC government. We're trying to rescue for that situation, because I think everybody after 2024, if we end up with a Deputy President Julius Malema or a Finance Minister Floyd Shivambu, is suddenly going to realise that Cape independence was the right all along, and will have a massive influx of people wanting to support us. But the danger is it's then like Noah's Ark. Once it started to rain and the doors had been closed, everybody wants to get on the ark, but it's too late. And let's not wait till after 2024 before we realise that we should have voted for Cape independence beforehand. Let's vote for it now whilst we still can, and not take the risk of finding out what 2029 is going to look like, because that's a long, long way away, particularly if we end up with an ANC, EFF, MK government.
Absolutely. And I would add to that, people shouldn't underestimate inflation or hyperinflation. So it's cute and everything to be prepared for load shedding or a water shortage, but once your currency is almost worthless, that changes the dynamic very quickly. So that's something people have to watch out for. That's the sort of the thing we haven't really experienced in South Africa, that really collapsed countries like Zimbabwe.
No, absolutely. I was in Zimbabwe when there was nothing in the shops, and to go into a supermarket, that's the size of a Pick and Pay, maybe a smaller Pick and Pay, and to walk around and see, literally, aisle upon aisle upon aisle of nothing in the shops, is a very, very sobering experience, and you wouldn't wish that on your worst enemy. And obviously Zimbabwe survived largely because they could run over the border to South Africa. There'll be no running over the border from South Africa anywhere.
Okay, next question. John Davis, do you really trust the DA to do what's right? I believe that the DA will stab their MPC, multi-party charter partners, in the back and power grab by going into a coalition with the ANC. What are your thoughts on this?
So it's probably odd, given that I am now a politician, but I don't trust any politician to keep their word. And we've seen the DA; they've already broken their word over the Referendum Party. No, absolutely. Do not trust the DA to do what's right. I think it's just the best of a bad lot, and maybe it's worth explaining our position on the DA. The Western Cape Parliament has got 42 seats. Ultimately, to form a government, you need to have 21 of those seats or more. We're likely to have 2. That's what we're targeting. So clearly, we can't form a government. The DA, I think, currently have 24, if I'm not mistaken, and the idea is that we get the DA down to, say, 19 or 20. 19 would be lovely, and then suddenly they need our 2 seats, and they can come to us or they can come to the Freedom Front Plus, but ultimately they need our seats to form a government. And the alternative is we refuse to give them, and we give them to the ANC. Well, no sane person is going to give, certainly amongst Cape Independence supporters, is going to say, look, use your seats to vote with the ANC. So therefore, we're going to vote with the DA. That's very different from us naively, supporting them over everything. Our whole party was formed to put the DA under pressure on this issue. Now, what do I think the DA's plan is? The DA has always known that the multi-party charter is going to fail. There is no question of that. And what do I think? I think the DA, for a very long time, has been planning to go into coalition with the ANC. And you can see that. You can look and see how many times Helen Zille's drawn a little triangle example that shows that you have to consolidate the middle. How many times all of the leaders have floated this idea: Steenhuisen, Zille, Hill Lewis. I don't know if Windy's done it or not. And repeatedly, and what happens is every time they do, they get a sort of kickback, and it's almost like the DA are sort of trying to desensitize us. So what do I think the DA's true position is? I think they're using the multi-party charter. as bait to get people to vote for the DA, and their intention is to go into a coalition with the ANC. The multi-party charter, the agreement doesn't stop them from doing that, because the multi-party charter only really comes into force if the multi-party charter gets a majority, and it isn't going to get a majority, and they all know it. So yeah, I think the DA's intention at this point in time is to go in with the ANC, and they're going to do that on the basis of saying, well, look, we've tried to get national power without them, but it's a choice of us or the EFF, and obviously it would be far better if it was us than the EFF, and I think that's their plan, and it's been their plan for a very long time.
Interesting times. I actually interviewed Alan Winder, and he said that he doesn't believe that the ANC and the DA should form a coalition. So it will be interesting, the dynamic there. I think there's quite a few people in the DA who will stand up to that, and I wonder if the DA will survive that. But I mean, yeah, interesting times await. Okay, next question. The male Jody Taylor, hopefully I pronounced that correctly, is a referendum party on the provincial and national ballot.
Very easy one to answer. Yes, and in fact, this year there are 3 ballots for the first time. So there's a provincial ballot, there's a regional ballot, and a national ballot, and we're on all 3. The Western Cape provincial ballot, the Western Cape regional ballot, and the national ballot. So yes, we're on all 3, and people can vote for us on all of those, and I hope they do vote for us on all of those. It'll help us a lot, and particularly obviously the national ballot means that people outside of the Western Cape, we know there are very, very, very many people outside of the Western Cape who support Cape independence and recognise how crucial it is to their long-term survival too, and it allows people to vote for us even if they're not in the Western Cape. So yes, we're on all 3 ballots.
Phil, what would you say to those individuals who say, okay, I'm going to vote for you on the provincial ballot, or I'd rather vote for the DA on a national ballot for the multi-party charter's sake? I've heard a few people speaking about the split. Splitting their vote, voting for the Referendum Party in the provincial ballot and voting for the DA in the national ballot.
So look, so yeah, what do I think of that? Well, that's definitely a trait, because we picked up from the Social Research Foundation. They suggested in their polling that they had the DA at 59% nationally in the Western Cape. In other words, within the Western Cape, voters were going to vote DA 59% nationally and 53% provincially. So there is a large section of people who are going to split their vote, and that would be odd. And it's indicative of how frustrated people have become, because traditionally there would have been a higher support for the DA in the Western Cape than nationally. With the Referendum Party, look, if people really want to split their vote, the critical one for us is the Western Cape Parliament. You know, we want to be in the Western Cape Parliament. That's where we're going to deliver the referendum. That is the government of the Cape of Good Hope, and therefore that is the one that's most important for us. But I would say to people, there really is no need to split your vote. We've already promised that we're going to vote with the multi-party charter anyway. So therefore, what difference is it going to make to vote for somebody else in the multi-party charter? We will do that anyway. So you don't have to do that. We've promised. Yeah, we want to help the rest of South Africa get rid of the ANC just as much as anybody else. But if you do want to split your vote, then please vote for us in the province. That's the critical
one. Okay, Panda, do you think MK Umkhonto we Sizwe would be more inclined to support KZN independence based on Zuma's comments about scrapping our current legal system for one based on African customary law?
Yes, look, I think KZN is heading for independence. I think there's little doubt over that, and I don't know particularly how where MK are on that, but I think that's likely to happen. We saw actually the deputy mayor of Durban from the Bantu party talking about it this week, and it's really great to see. Sorry, the rain's coming in now. I'm not sure you're picking up on the mic, but it's really great to see people talking therefore about KZN independence, Zulu independence, Sotho independence, and ultimately that is the future of South Africa. Now, whether as groups we then cooperate afterwards, that's fine. That's a choice for people to make. but I think, undoubtedly we are going to see that. And I think in the early days, you had a lot of people saying, no way, we're never going to allow Cape independence. And increasingly, it's still a minority, but it's becoming a more vocal minority. People in the other parts of the country are not saying, listen, they can't have Cape independence. They're saying, well, we want our independence too. And of course, we love that. We're not wanting rights for ourselves that we wouldn't give to anybody else, as you know. So I think that the more people who start saying, well, hang on a second, we see our future, our best future, outside of this sort of centralized unitary state of South Africa, the better. And effectively, you've definitely got the Zulus. You've also got Afrikaners. It's interesting to talk about the Sotho. That's the first time I've seen that. Has been moves for Xhosa independence in the Eastern Cape. Look, it's fantastic to see these different people emerging, and I don't know what role MK will play in that. But unquestionably, South Africa is as a concept is living on borrowed time, with or without Cape independence.
Yeah, Mother Nature is getting vicious with the rain. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen. Phil, a follow-up question on that. I think a few people here might be part of one of those movements, like the Zulu independence movement. What short piece of advice? Can you hear me?
I can, but maybe you can get a bit nearer to your mic. You're quite quiet now.
Oh, what advice would you give to, for example, the Zulu independence movement or any of these independence movements? I mean, you've been in this trade for 4 years. Any one of those people listening, what would you say? Do this, and you're guaranteed to really get this on the track.
So look, we obviously have spoken to different things, and it's certainly not our place to tell anybody else how to do things. I think look, I think often these things just require people to find the sort of the courage to stand up. And sometimes it's the reality of society that people need to know that it's okay. And therefore, that's where multiple independence movements become very, very helpful. So what would I say to the Zulu guys? I think they sort of started already, and I think they're doing well, which is great. I think obviously the whole awareness thing is the starting point. You have to kind of get these things onto the political agenda, and that's where we've been really, really successful in Cape independence in terms of whether people love it or hate it. Everybody knows about it now. It's part of the sort of the political zeitgeist. Where perhaps Zulu independence hasn't really been that yet, and I think that's starting to emerge. So that would probably be the main focus. Look, I think if Zulu independence really picks up steam, then I think the route from A to B is a much more simpler one. There is a Zulu people, very obviously. There's a Zulu language. There's a Zulu royal family. We've got the Ngama Trust. So ultimately, I think if the Zulus really get behind this, then their route to independence is a very, very straightforward one. It would be interesting to see what happens. I mean, I'd love to see them push it.
Okay, next question. Great questions from Panda, so we'll throw another one. Will the CIP, the Cape Independence Party, join the Referendum Party in its endeavour in light of them not making the ballot?
I hope so. So look, in the first instance, the final ballot is only confirmed on the 10th of April. So let's not write off the CIP yet. And I know they're fighting hard to try and get back onto the ballot. Obviously the CIP has been a long-standing ally of the Cape Independence Advocacy Group. They're an ally of the Referendum Party, obviously we wish them every success and strength in their efforts. I'm absolutely sure that if they don't find a way of getting onto the ballot, that they'll fall in behind the other independence parties. Look, we certainly will reach out and do whatever we could, and already are doing so. I mean, ultimately, I hope that when people view our history over several years, we've always been all about Cape independence. It's not about us. It's not about the party. It's not about taking power. it's all about getting Cape independence done. So absolutely, and I'm sure they will. And actually, interesting enough, I have seen that. I did see on the CIP's Facebook page somebody saying, well, if I can't vote for the CIP, I'm going to spoil my ballot. And CIP themselves came back and said, no, you mustn't do that. We get your frustration, but you must go and vote for Cape independence. And that was very good to see.
Okay. We have a question here from Steph. Oh, bit of a lag, sorry. Can we, as private citizens, put pressure on a DA, and Alan in particular? And if yes, how can we do that?
Yes, people can. I mean, obviously, it's much more difficult as an individual, but I think what can people do? They can find out who their local councillor is, and they can speak to their councillor and make sure that they understand that Cape independence is an issue they feel strongly about. They can write to the DA leaders. They can write to local newspapers and raise this issue from time to time. Alan Windy, I think once a month, they have a sort of meet and greet, and people, if they go in person, then can ask him. Obviously, he gets very frustrated about that, which is great. So there are certain things that you can do as an individual, and it will be great for people to see people doing that. Ultimately banding together with other groups, other individuals, and working together, amplifies that pressure exponentially. So look, I think that's some deserve. Yes, by all means, write to them. By all means, get in contact with your local councillor, but also join the groups. So when there are calls for petitions and so on, then obviously sign those. And we gave that last petition to Windy, which had about 30,000 signatures. It was great. Marches were great, and they're good ways of creating pressure.
Okay. The interesting questions keep on flowing in, getting more controversial, I see, by the moment. Okay, I'm going to throw up this one from Eva. With current immigration trends, when do you project the Cape will be back in ANC hands?
Okay, interesting one there. So one of the fascinating things is, and this is polling that's been done by the Social Research Foundation. So whether it'll be in the I don't think it's going to be back in the ANC hands ever is the answer. But I think what the danger is that we end up ironically, perhaps in the EFF hands is what polling says becomes more likely, and that's not imminent right now. So what do I say in terms of provincial migration? One of the frustrations with provincial migration is that we now know from polling, because it's been specifically polled by the Social Research Foundation, is that migrants who are coming particularly from the Eastern Cape absolutely despise the DA and are not willing to vote for the DA under any circumstances. The majority of them currently vote for the ANC, but increasingly they're moving away from the ANC and to the EFF. So if we think of where the ANC support currently is, and we're seeing that move away to even more radical views. So without question, as the demographic composition of the Western Cape electorate changes, then unquestionably the DA will not be able to hang on to power for too much longer. And I would look. I think there's a real reasonable chance, and ironically, the DA think that too. That they will fall below 50% in this election. If they don't, they unquestionably will in 2029 if there are free and fair elections by then. So it's a factor, and I think it's a difficult factor to talk about because we don't want to be racist. We're deeply non-racial, so therefore you kind of don't want to get into the sort of, what can I say, the populism aspects of that. But actually, at the same time, the danger is that you become so tentative of not talking about these issues that you then ignore what is really quite critical fact, and that is that the Western Cape has, I've recently talked about an ideological homeland. We've got this set of ideological beliefs, and if we don't act now, then we are going to not be able to practice our beliefs in the Western Cape, and that probably is 5 years away, and that's terrifying.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Phil, I think this was a very interesting session, and I think we answered a lot of questions. I think we delved into the issue as well. Is there anything else you want to add before we conclude? If anything you want to leave the Referendum Party supporters or anyone watching this?
No, look, just to say thank you so much for that. Look, there's a whole lot of people out there working really, really hard. Posters are going up, activism events are happening. We've got these WhatsApp groups that are growing, and there's a whole bunch of people that are working really, really hard. And actually, it's a real privilege and super exciting for us to see this party, which is really only 5 months old, sort of rising. A huge, huge thank you to everybody for that. And I think it's just that same message to say to people, we really have to just keep on banging that drum. People must vote for Cape Independence. And that's the biggest danger is you end up, always people, I like Cape Independence. Who do you vote for? Oh, I voted for the DA in the end. I was just worried that the ANC might get back. And that's the biggest danger. We've all got it, at the end of the day, people say, Cape Independence isn't possible. And actually the biggest reason normally it isn't possible is because of the people who keep saying it's not possible. It's completely possible. We can deliver Cape Independence relatively easy, but we have to go and get 100,000 people to vote. And that's the thing that every single one of us has to sort of get in and take it on and say, look, it's 50 days. If we want to have a future on the African continent, a future in terms of this broadly, and I'm talking in a traditional sense, Western type values, non-racialism, freer markets, a business friendly environment that creates employment and prosperity and better conditions, then we have to act now. And that's the message that there isn't going to be another chance, not easily. So we absolutely have to go and get people out, and it's all of our jobs to make that happen. Huge thank you to those of people that are already doing it, and for those who perhaps are watching on the sidelines, get involved, join your local branch, contact us through our website or info@referendumparty.org if you don't know where that is. We'll get you in touch with other people and then help us get those votes. But thank you so much, and enjoy your evening.
Absolutely. And I mean, the DA is probably going to parrot this narrative that you have to be terrified of the ANC EFF Patriotic Alliance coalition. But I think everyone just needs to do some maths, and I think it adds up to like 35% at the most. So, I mean, really, ladies and gentlemen, that's not something to be worried about. It might be an odd scenario in Knysna. Obviously, we don't want the worst for them, but I mean, that's sort of an outlier. It's not going to happen at a provincial level. It's just a question of who's the coalition, who's the DA going to form a coalition with? Hopefully, with your support, the Cape Independence Party. Thank you everyone for joining us. This has been awesome. And there's going to be, I believe, 2 more Q&A sessions this week, one on Twitter, one on Facebook, and we're going to continue this trend. So thank you so much. Enjoy. Moenie laat die wind julle wegblaas nie.